Hello. We're ready when you guys are.
I got one here, Brian. If you want it, I don't know.
Well, we'll call the meeting to order and we'll go ahead and approve the minutes of the November 4th, 2021 meeting.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes. Sorry, I'll make the motion to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion is approved. Do we have any unfinished business to discuss? Seeing none, we'll get on to new business with flood ordinance from Nathan Morborn being the first part on the agenda.
All right. Good morning. Some of you probably know me, maybe not. I am Nathan Borboom, engineer for the city of Fargo. Understand that you guys have had a few questions on kind of the history of the floodproofing code at your last meeting. So I'm here this morning to step through a quick few slides on a little bit of brief history of the code, as well as be available for any questions you may have, and feel free to interrupt me at any point too. So the need for the floodproofing code started back in the 1970s after the city joined the National Flood Insurance Program in 1971. The National Flood Insurance Program does not allow for the lowest floor of a building or a basement to be below the base flood elevation, which is also the water surface elevation on a 100-year flood. So this restriction would have essentially eliminated basements from being able to be constructed within Fargo. The local community's preference was to continue to construct basements, though due to multiple reasons, but primarily the three that I have on the screen here right now. So as a result of this restriction, the floodproofing code was developed. The original one was developed in 1975, which was then approved by FEMA and allowed for the city to have a basement exception, which then allowed us to be able to continue to construct basements within our community. I also want to point out that Fargo is only one of 54 communities that participate in NFIP that has a basement exception from FEMA. I think this is important to point out because we know that FEMA really isn't too much of a fan of these basement exceptions, and they would really prefer that they go away. And then also, I recall former inspections director Ron Strand mentioning to me in the past that when he was first hired, one of the primary responsibilities he was told was, don't lose the basement exception. So, I mean, it was very important for the city to be able to continue being able to construct basements. So you go from 1975, fast forward 40 years to 2015, when we were in the process, or FEMA was in the process of remapping our special flood hazard area. So like mentioned, it's not too surprising that a priority was put in place during this remapping process to make sure that we maintained our basement exception. So that was a requirement by FEMA going through the remapping process, that we had to prove to FEMA that our code was still meeting all their requirements. So in order to complete the certification, we hired a consultant to complete a thorough review of the entire code, including the structural components of the floodproof basements. As far as I'm aware, analysis of this type had not occurred since 1975, so it wasn't too surprising that we found some portions of the code that had to be updated. When we did a thorough review of the code, we looked through all those items I've listed on here. I won't detail all of them, but it was a very thorough review that you have to account for in the floodproof basement design. So that was the primary aspect of the code that we found out of date, was the design of our floodproof basements. So knowing that we were going to have to complete a redesign of the floodproof basements, We worked closely with the home builders and their members to design a floodproof basement that tried to minimize any constructability issues, as well as tried to reduce the increased costs that were going to be incurred with the change of the design as much as possible. As Clay, as you can probably recall, we had numerous meetings with the home builders going through all those changes. Got a lot of feedback, good feedback from the HBA members. Tried to incorporate as much of that feedback as we could in our standardized design. Unfortunately, just due to the requirements, we couldn't incorporate all the feedback received. But in the end, I think we had a pretty good end product that accounted for as much as we can while still making sure we met all the requirements to make sure that we maintained that basement exception from FEMA. So finally, I just also want to point out that, the whole point of doing our structural design report was developing a standard design for a floodproof basement that any builder could come and utilize at their discretion. Nothing within the code or our ordinance requires home builders to use that design. Any home builder can hire their own structural engineer and submit that design for part of the building permit approval process. So that's just a quick history of the floodproof basement, and hopefully you guys have some questions.
Questions from anybody?
That's the first time I've really heard the origin of the floodproof basement ordinance. And, it's something that we don't do a tremendous amount of single-family residential. We do a lot of multifamily mixed use and that kind of thing. But it's really interesting hearing where it originated from. And, we weren't a part of the deliberations that happened in 2015 when it was rewritten. And, I'm assuming that a lot of the folks that were representing the HBA brought a lot of experience to the table and a lot of specific project experience and best practices and things like that. And so, it seems like it was a pretty thorough process, but I'm sure as things evolve and one question that I would have just in the ongoing evolution of this, what does the impact of our flood protection that hopefully will be certified by 6 years from now, what does the impact of that mean for the exemption going forward?
Yeah, great question. So the project you're referring to is the Fargo-Moorhead diversion, of course. That is going to significantly change the 100-year floodplain throughout the city, reduce it, and it'll be essentially remapped to 37 feet, where today we're right around 39.5. So we anticipate that will allow our building requirements that we have today to be able to be changed, reduce the areas that the floodproof basements are required to more adjust to that residual or that remaining 100-year floodplain once we get to that point. Unfortunately, we still live in that window where we still are regulated by FEMA under our current floodplain, so we can't quite change it yet. But a few months ago, we had a brown bag with City Commission, and some of those topics included, detailing out future discussions that need to be had with them on what our floodplain management rules and ordinances will be once we are in that post-diversion situation.
Has there been any review of the design and things as we've gotten some experience with it and determination that it's still appropriate as far as, pressures on foundation walls and tie-togethers and all of that? Is that something that the engineering department or codes departments have had kind of circled back to look at, the last 6 years of constructing under that code and seeing if there's any adjustments or things that need to happen with it?
We have not, but the parameters that I had listed out here really haven't changed. The Corps of Engineers floodproof regulations have not changed from what I'm aware, and the soil characteristics that we analyzed during this design, haven't really changed. So I think it was 40 years was a long time between the original design up to the current design. So I think that's really just the updates and building practices. A lot of those were accounted for in the design, and I don't anticipate really any changes occurring now, but any builder could, review and do any changes off of our design and submit it for approval through the inspections department as well.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think if that's anything that we were gonna look at in a big process, it would maybe be something that HPA and the city would have to work together on to, as that time comes to either review or the diversion gets done. And
Yeah.
looking at that, I would imagine your developments are gonna be allowed to be placed lower.
Yep, that's all part of the future conversations is
Yeah.
what is the appropriate building elevations moving forward once the diversion is completed.
Yeah, because I know that has, along with the structural side of those foundations, a lot of the cost was in, garage foundations now are kind of a minimum 6 feet. Some of them are 8 feet to get to virgin soils and things like that. So it is a pretty big cost increase over if you're not building flood. And more so, not so much the bar and those types of things that was added, but more so the extra depth on foundations
No, sure.
and fill and that kind of thing. So, okay. Any other questions from anybody? All right, thank you,
All
Nathan.
right, thank you guys.
Next up, we got the IRC Chapter 11 with Melissa.
So the International Energy Conservation Code, chapters 4 and 5 are essentially chapter 11 of the International Residential Code. So the section numbers all line up. So the ones that I have listed on the handout that you guys got has the IRC section first and then the IECC section after that. So you can follow along in whichever book you choose.
Okay.
What chapter for those, Melissa?
It's chapter 4 in the IECC
Okay.
and chapter 11 in the IRC. Oh, sorry, let me say that differently. There's a separate section for the residential provisions in the IECC that starts over with chapter 1, but chapter 1 and 2 are all the administration and scope provisions and the definitions that are covered elsewhere in the IRC. So mostly what we're going to be talking about is starting with chapter 3 is just the climate zones, and they did change that, but there's nothing else that we need to talk about in there. So I'll get to that in just a second. I did want to note that they completely rearranged all of the energy code provisions because they changed how the paths are listed in there. So the same compliance paths still exist, but they rearranged the code to make it easier to determine which path you want to follow and then to find the specific requirements for that particular path. So 95% of the times we see residential contractors follow the prescriptive path that's in the code, but there are other options that they can choose. As a result of the rearrangement, there are changes throughout the residential requirements that just are for organizational purposes rather than changing the impact of the code. Like they went through the entire code and removed the words prescriptive and mandatory from the section titles, which means that there's a bar in there showing a change, but there wasn't any change to that particular piece necessarily. The intent that city staff has is to adopt the 2021 codes with amendments to essentially match current Minnesota State Energy Code, so that we're creating an even playing field on both sides of the border. And then we're still moving forward with a little bit higher values without making the big leap to the numbers that are in the 2021 code entirely. So if we want to start, section 1101.7 of the IRC, which is section 301 of the IECC. The climate zone definitions and maps have been revamped. About 10% of the counties were reclassified, including ours, which was moved from Zone 7 to Zone 6A. So there's a long chunk of information in there that's essentially just maps and telling you who went to what section or went to what zone. So then we can skip ahead. The definitions haven't really changed. It's just been reorganized some. So we can jump ahead to section 1101.13.5 in the IRC or section 401.2.5 in the IECC. This is a new section that adds a set of conditions to the various compliance paths. One of the options listed has to be selected in addition to the requirements for that particular compliance path. And there's a section later in the code that lists out what those conditions, those extra choices are. Section 1102.1 in the residential code or section 402.1 in the IECC. This section has been reorganized and expanded to clarify how our values shall be calculated where layered insulation is used. It isn't a change in effect, it's just a clarification. Table 1102.1.2, which is on page 1142 in the residential code, and table R402.1.2 in the IECC, which is on page R4-2 in the energy code. The U factor requirement table has been switched with the R value table, so they're in a different order. So the table numbers have changed, so we need to update our amendments. We recommend continuing the existing local amendment and changing the U factor for zone 6 for the frame wall column to 0.57 and 0.59 for the basement wall column. We additionally recommend changing our amendment a little bit to add to altering the ceiling column for zone 6 from 0.24 to 0.26. That'll match the requirements in the Minnesota Energy Code. Table 1102.1.3 in the residential code and table 402.1.3 in the energy code, which is on page R4-3. Staff recommends altering the existing local amendment for our new climate zone, zone 6, to 0.32 for the fenestration U factor column, 49 for the ceiling R value column, 21 or 13 plus 5 for the wood frame wall column, and 15 for the basement wall and crawl space wall columns. This will match the currently adopted Minnesota Energy Code requirements. Section 1102.2.12, that's section 402.2.12 in the Energy Code. That's on page R4-6. Heated garages have been added to the existing section for sunrooms, allowing thermally isolated conditioned spaces to enjoy lower R values than the main dwelling unit. The minimum ceiling insulation is R24 and the minimum wall insulation is R13. And this applies to attached or detached garages. Section 1102.4 or section R402.4 on page R4-6. Staff recommends discontinuing the existing local amendment for R2 occupancies as section R401.5 already makes this distinction. The amendment was added when we adopted the 2009 edition of the code, but when that section was revamped later, we never deleted our amendment, so it's just unnecessary at this point. Table 1102.4.1.1 and table R402.4.1.1 in the Energy Code, which starts on page R4-7. Staff recommends a local amendment adding a paragraph to the insulation installation criteria column in the basement, crawl space, and slab foundation row to read: exterior foundation insulation shall be covered in flash to protect it from exposure to light and weather to a minimum of 6 inches below grade, and be covered by a minimum 6 mil polyethylene slip sheet over the entire surface. In addition, staff recommends adding a footnote C to this table in the IRC, specifying that the section numbers listed in this table are from the IECC. So if you look, the table in the IRC uses the IECC section numbers, which is a little confusing because we just want to clarify that it's in a totally different book if you're trying to find the section number it's referring to. The requirement that we're looking at adding for the protection for the exterior foundation insulation and the slip sheet will match the Minnesota Energy Code requirements.
Listen, that one, I know in Minnesota when they went to the exterior foam on foundations, we also worked through with them and we're allowed to use a spray foam on the interior of that
Yes.
foundation as an exception.
Yes.
Is that gonna follow through on?
Yes,
this also?
that amendment would only apply if you choose to do the exterior foundation insulation.
Okay.
So we're not requiring that.
All right.
The 6 mil polyethylene slip sheet, I guess that would be one way to, and I get it, it's a way to, I guess, protect it a little bit. Are there other options that are, I mean, is that like the only option, or what, are there other options to that? What if somebody continued the, let's say, steel siding down below?
Well, the slip sheet goes all the way down to the footing. It's in the entire length of the foundation, or the entire length of the foundation insulation.
Okay.
And so I don't know that you could
Okay,
do
I
side. You
read-
can
I
probably
read minimum
find.
of 6 inches below grade.
Yep. Yeah. The next portion is the poly that goes for the entire length
Okay,
of the
I got it.
insulation.
I got it, okay.
Okay. Section 1102.4.1.2, which is section R402.4.1.2 on page R4-6. This section includes a new exception for heated garages, whether attached or detached, that allows for visual inspection to confirm compliance. And a second new exception was added for testing conditions in attached dwelling units and units smaller than 1,500 square feet. So it gives a little relief from the blower door test requirements applying to everything. It exempts out garages and row houses and units that are smaller than total 1,500 square feet. Those are allowed to have the visual inspection instead of requiring the blower door test. Although, of course, they can always choose to do the blower door test if they like. Section 1102.4.1.3 or section 402.4.1.3 in the Energy Code. It's on page 4-9. Staff recommends discontinuing the existing local amendment, removing the requirement for air leakage testing. The new amendment to section 1102.4.1.2 still allows that visual inspection for heated garages, which is essentially the end result that we're looking for. You can do the current amendment allows for a visual inspection on everything in the house and eliminates the requirement for blower door tests. So essentially we want to eliminate that amendment and require the blower door test for structures.
On that particular item, I know we have had conversations back and forth if you're doing a prescriptive insulation that's being inspected by the inspections department. And that is proven to be adequate to reach the blower door test. That the blower door test is a kind of a redundant cost that the consumer is having to pay. That we kind of looked at it as being maybe an added cost that's unnecessary on that home, and it comes down to affordability of the homes. So that's something that I would want to have some discussions on affordability and whether that test is necessary on an inspected system that's been proven to work.
Have you done blower door testing?
In some of the Minnesota projects, and I know a lot of folks have, and we're going so far past what the blower door requires with how we build things up here that it's not even a question.
So what would be the cost of the blower door test? Because that's really what's
Yeah, have you? I don't know if John or one of the others would have a current cost on that. Go ahead.
I do blower door tests and I charge $200.
400. Okay. 200. Okay.
So, yeah, we can definitely have further discussions on that. We're gonna have another meeting after this one to go through all of the requested amendments and sections that you guys have requested to revisit.
Yeah.
So we can have discussions.
Well, I just
And
try
come
to be
back to it.
cognizant of, adding costs, because I know every $1,000 takes X amount of buyers out of the market. And just trying to make sure we're keeping our head wrapped around that we do what's necessary to achieve a good tight building that performs well, but not throw cost out that the consumers have to pay for that may not be necessary. So, okay.
Section 1102.4.6, which is section 402.4.6 in the IECC, that is on page R4-9. This new section outlines air sealing for outlet boxes, which match those for the recessed lighting that have already been in the code and enforced. Either the air barrier must be installed behind the boxes or a marked air sealed box must be used. Section 1103.3.6, or section 403.3.6 in the Energy Code, which is on page 4-11. Staff recommends adding a local amendment striking item 3 and adding an exception to read, a total leakage test shall not be required for ducts or air handlers that comply with section 1103.3.2, item 1. Section 1103.3.7, which is section 403.3.7 in the Energy Code on page 4-11. Staff recommends continuing the existing local amendment allowing building cavities to be used as plenums. Section 1103.6.1, which is section 403.6.1 in the Energy Code. Staff recommends discontinuing this amendment as the requirement no longer applies with our new climate zone. Section 1103.6.3, which is section 403.6.3 in the Energy Code on page R4-12. Staff recommends adding a new local amendment deleting this section requiring flow rate testing. Sections 1104.2 and 1104.3, which are sections 404.2 and 404.3 on page R4-13. Require occupant sensors, daylight sensors, or dimmers for interior lights and daylight sensors for exterior lights. Staff recommends adding a local amendment deleting these sections in their entirety. Sections 1105 and 1106 on, which are sections 405 and 406 on page 4-13 through 4-20 in the Energy Code. These sections were extensively revised for clarity, but the end effect was not significant. Table 1105.4.2 parentheses 1, which is table 405.4.2 parentheses 1 on page R4-16 in the Energy Code. Staff recommends discontinuing the existing local amendment to bring our requirements in line with those currently adopted in Minnesota. Table 1106.5, which is table 406.4 in the Energy Code on page R4-19. The energy rating index score required for this compliance path has changed. Staff recommends adding a local amendment, changing the required value to the previous score of 58 from the new rating of 54.
What's the, what's the reasoning behind that?
That's the exact same. We're changing it to match what's required in Minnesota. That's the previous value that was on that particular compliance path. So if you choose to do that rating, then we want to keep it essentially the same across the board.
But it seems to me that 58 to 54 really is, I'm sure there's different ways to get 58 or 50, those points, right? So really, the difference is it's really not so much, so what Minnesota is saying is that they're requiring you to get 4 more points, right? So I guess my question would be.
No, the other way around. So we're changing it from 58 to 54.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, yeah, and 54 is what we currently have adopted as well.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
No problem. Section 1108, which is IECC Section 408 on 4-21. This is the new section that I talked about earlier, referred to by Section 1101.13.2, which gives you some additional requirements for if you're following different paths, which ones you have to meet. One of the options that's available in this list is essentially having all of your ductwork within the thermal envelope, which is a pretty straightforward way to get meeting this section without doing anything additional that you weren't already doing. Houses using the total performance path can either add one option or demonstrate that their design scores 95% or less on the compliance report. Sections 1109 through 1113 on pages 1162 through 1164, which are the same as Chapter 5 in the IECC on pages R-5-1 through R5-3. These sections cover existing buildings, alterations, additions, and historic buildings. There were no significant changes outside of renumbering the sections and rewording them to match the new organization of the code.
Do we have any questions or comments from anybody on what we've heard? You would step up to the mic.
Larry Mayer with Solution Design. I just wanted to make a comment at the top of the second page talking about blower door testing. We found from experience that if that blower door test is done after the framers have put in the windows and doors, it's very easy and convenient for the builder to fix the leaks, and it's also an educational moment for the framer and the project manager to see what was done right and what was done wrong. If we wait until the blower door test is done after the whole house is completed, nobody's learned anything, and the difficulty of fixing the holes and leaks is to the point where most people just sort of shrug their shoulders and walk away. And so I would recommend that as an alternative practice, if the builder can meet the code standard at that point in time when the windows and doors are in, but the sheetrock and insulation is in, then that should be acceptable, because I see a disconnect between the framers understanding what they did right or wrong and some of the trades understanding what they did right or wrong, because by the time the blower door test is done at the end of completion of the project, it just doesn't get done.
You're talking about after it's sheetrocked, but before it's taped type of thing? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it can be done that way. In Europe, they require 3 blower door tests, one after the windows and doors are in and the house wrap is on, a second one after the sheetrock is up but not taped, and a third one at the completion of the project. In Canada, they just require 2 blower door tests, one before the sheetrock is taped and one at the end. But I see it as such a huge teachable moment for the framer and the project manager to be able to see the problems in the early stages of construction and be able to easily fix them versus the blower door test at the end when it's difficult to fix.
Give me an example of a problem and how it's fixed that you've seen.
Could you
At
speak
that
up? I don't have the best hearing.
Give me an example of a problem that you've seen and that has been fixed at that point in time during construction.
Well, I see a lot of leakage at the base plate. I see a lot of leakage where the floor trusses are sitting on top of the foundation wall. I see leakage at the windows as they're flashed and taped on the outside. These are common areas where I'm asked to come in and do a thermal imaging audit of that house, and you see these problems over and over again. And they'd be easy to fix at that early stage of construction. The other thing is that you were talking about slip sheet. A slip sheet that's used to protect the exterior foundation foam, if that is left in place on top of the wall when you're setting your floor trusses, you stop the wicking action of moisture from the foundation going up into the wall cavity and up into the attic. I've been into dozens and dozens of attics where the insulation is all wet. And it's because of this wicking action where that slip sheet, if left in place, at least at that critical point at the top of the foundation wall, can stop a lot of that moisture movement. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more in depth, but those are key elements.
Does a foam sill sealer do the same as the plastic sheet?
Well, the foam acts as a water barrier and it acts as a thermal barrier, but the foundation pad is still sitting naked on the virgin ground that's 100% moisture down there. So even though the exterior foam and damp proofing is on, that naked pad is still the majority of the moisture coming into the house is coming into the pad. And again, the pad's the lowest point in the building. I will show in pictures in the presentation to follow here of 5,000 PSI concrete with water wicking up into that. So I've talked to concrete experts that do legal remediation, and 5,000 is a much less permeability than 3,000 PSI concrete, but it's not a water stop or a capillary break. It's an improvement, but it's not a 100% solution. And because the river valley is and Fargo Moorhead is at the lowest point in the valley, we have a pretty high water table here. And what is that water table in? It's in clay. And clay, through the University of Minnesota's research, will wick up to 18 vertical feet from the water table. Well, it doesn't have to wick more than 1 to 2 feet in the Fargo Moorhead area, just because of where we are as the lowest point in the valley and where the water is.
Okay. Did we have some other people that wanted to comment? Okay.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Bill with Draft Busters Insulation, and I've been doing blower doors for 10 years, and I go in and I make $200 in 15 minutes, and to do them in Minnesota all the time, it's to me it's a waste of time, because they're sealed up usually down to 1 or a 2 at the most, and by doing the blower door earlier, yeah, you can find some leaks, or you can do them later, and yeah, you can find some more leaks. But if you're scoring a 3, it doesn't matter. It's going to pass the test, and if we, how do I want to say this? With the blower door, it's not having anything to do with how your house is insulated. All the blower door is actually doing is what's your vapor barrier in your house, is how well you've polyed it. Because I could actually poly a house, do a blower door on it, and it would pass and have no insulation in the house. So what a blower door is only designed for is for your moisture and the poly inside the house. I absolutely don't recommend, if you did do blower doors, you'd have to do several of them to get to where you want to be with the project. With doing blower doors, what I do find the worst is when you have ductwork that runs up into your attic, that the ductwork, it leaks, seals around the ductwork leak coming in and out of the house. We have ductwork, any ductwork that's in an attic should be buried in the fiberglass insulation. We see ductwork that comes out and it goes up into the air and goes back down, and they say, well, that's a cold air return. Well, when your furnace isn't running, that ductwork that's above that insulation is going to be the same temperature that's outside. And so that is not a good way to be doing the ductwork inside these houses either. Any questions?
Any other questions?
I don't know if you're advocating for blower door testing or not.
I would say no. I mean,
That's,
to me, I'd like, yeah, do a whole lot of blower doors. I'll make a lot of money on the deal, but I don't think it's necessary cost to a house. I think the visual inspections that the inspectors do far outweigh anything that a blower door test and the cost that it would cost to a house. So I'm like shooting myself in the foot, because it's like, yes, I make money on the deal, but I don't think you need to have that.
well, that's commendable. I would have thought you would have been serving your own best interest in your presentation.
I'd rather take the time and insulate the house right, and instead of wasting my time having to come in and
So,
do the test.
Larry, you also do blower door testing? Is that what I'm hearing?
I do blower door testing, but a lot of times I try to pass it off to other people because I feel it a conflict of interest. I'm the one who actually designing and supervising the building, and for me to blower test my own building, but I do a blower door test for contractors outside the area and some in the area here.
So my question for both of you would be, how often does a blower door test fail?
Well, in multifamily, it's right on the borderline. But in Fargo Moorhead right now, the builders do a very good job compared to other parts of the country. In the southern states, they have a hard time making 4 air changes per hour. And HBA builders are typically around 2.2, 2.3 air changes per hour, which is well below the 3.0 in the code.
So what's your answer to that?
The houses that I've actually had blower door tests fail are houses that have a lot of can lights in them.
Okay,
And then to go back and fix them was we go up in the attic and we put boxes over the can lights to seal them up, and then the house will pass. But if you get more than 20 can lights in a house, the can light's supposed to be airtight, it says on the box, and they're not. They're very, very leaky items.
okay, and I think that was one of the things that's in here, right, Melissa, that about the can lights or for those boxes
Yes,
have to
the
be
can,
airtight?
the can lights
What
and the
you're saying
outlet
is they're
boxes.
not, even if they say they're airtight, they're not necessarily airtight?
Right, they're not airtight at all.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we're usually, by the method we're using right now, which is visual, we're usually passing, the houses are typically passing.
Yep,
with-
because when they come in for an insulation inspection, we've run poly across the ceiling. And then when the sheetrock comes in, the sheetrocker cuts out for the can light. So when we have
So
the poly on, it's over the can light at inspection, but after you
after
sheetrock,
it cuts
you cut
it,
it out.
then it's gone.
Yep.
Okay. So Melissa, the reason then that we decided to go with the blower door test, where we used to have an exception where they didn't have to do it, it was just by visual. What's the reasoning behind that then? Are you finding that there's some contractors out there that just
Well,
don't
and-
know what they're doing or aren't doing it right or what?
It's, yeah, there's sort of a two-pronged reason for it. The first is that it is required in the Minnesota Energy Code, and if we're gonna match their code,
Sure.
that's one of the pieces. The other reason is that I know that there are lots of higher-end builders who do an excellent job, and some of the insulation contractors are very good at their jobs, but it's not consistent across the board. And a visual inspection doesn't catch things like leaky can lights or badly installed air barriers in places that are difficult to see once the house is pretty much put together and insulated. And we don't know on some of the other contractors and some of the other less stringently built buildings whether they're built well enough to pass because nobody tests them. And so we don't have any evidence saying that they are built to a standard that's going to actually pass. And we want it to be across the board, essentially everyone having the same rules that they have to play by. So then, the folks who are already doing these things it'll cost them, the $200 and the 15 minutes to get that passed. But the folks who are not doing it well, those are the ones who need to be sort of brought up to the point where what we can't catch on a visual inspection is getting pointed out by these blower door tests, and we can educate people and figure out where the problems are occurring and sort of get everyone on the same page.
My concern is that if 90% and just based on, what I'm hearing as far as the blower door tests that have been made, if 90 or 95% of those buildings, this is just really not even needed. What we're doing is we're going to that, well, let's say 95 out of 100, so 95 times $200 to catch, the 5% that aren't. That's a lot of money that's being spent in reality to find those 5% that aren't doing it right.
Well, we're looking at it the other way. We're only testing a small percentage of the houses right now because the vast majority of the houses that are built are not built by the custom home high-end builders. And those are not tested. And so that's the majority of the buildings in Fargo.
Right.
And so we don't know what the rate of passage would be for those other builders, for those big production builders, because they're not being tested.
This just reminds me a lot of when we started to do ductwork testing and duct sealing, because they didn't used to do duct sealing, and then they realized what a significant issue it was, and they started to do duct sealing, and then they did duct pressure testing to verify that the sealing was done right. And eventually we got to the point where all the contractors basically sealed their ductwork up far better than they didn't used to use any sealing, they just used the metal.
Correct.
Metal to metal seal that a duct crimping, process results in. So I just wonder, will we get to a point where this isn't necessary because, or that we're doing something that always passes, and you get to, and this happened on ductwork where they would just kind of blow you off and not really do the testing. They do it out in the driveway or out in the parking lot and in their truck. So that's my only concern is at some point, is it going to become kind of like, okay, well, everybody's doing it this way. And again, my bigger concern ends up being is because we've talked about a couple of other things about the air exchanger, right? So in
Right.
other words, we're bringing in air directly from outside to bring it to the inside because our houses are so tight that if we don't do that, we end up with moisture buildup, and then we potentially have moisture in walls or mold or, those kinds of things. So we have one end where I've heard that, new houses, and I've been in new houses where there's just moisture all the way along, the windows, along the lower part of the windows, because there isn't enough air change in the house. And this is something that keeps the air in the house, and then we have to buy an air exchanger to make sure that we get fresh air in the house because it's too tight.
Correct. And so part of that question is designing the mechanical system, which is required in the residential code, so it's not part of the energy code requirements, but it's another piece of the puzzle. It would be ideal if we start doing the testing and we find that, yeah, everyone's passing and we don't need it anymore and we can take it back out next code cycle. That's great. That would be ideal. But we don't have any way of predicting what the results are going to be until we actually have them tested. And so that's why we're recommending that we just stick with what the code requires and verify where we're at. Because if some movement forward needs to happen, then at least we know where it needs to happen and how, you know, who's sort of, I don't want to say dragging us down because that's very negative, but where the problem areas are lying. So then we can tailor things.
What I'm kind of wondering is, if the issue isn't more that we train our insulators and those people on what we need to do to seal the gaps that we've found through the testing that has been done. And I would think that we have people in the room that probably know what needs to be told to the insulators and the inspectors on what process needs to happen in order to fix the issues that have been identified already. And we don't need to go through a 3-year air door testing because I think we already know what the issues are. And so I would, kind of welcome that discussion is, sometimes you're trying to catch it on the backside where actually you should just go to the front side. And, if my carpenters are making miters that you can throw a cat through, there's a pretty easy way to cure that. It's not a code issue. It's hey, they got to be tighter. I think maybe we'll make some comment on that.
I would 100% agree with that, that there is a lot of insulators out there. There should be some kind of a certification for the insulation company to have down the road. And then you could easily, put the blame back onto them or however you want to do that part of it. But air exchangers, absolutely you need to have them in these houses because it's a health issue. If you think of the house as like a hot air balloon, you're sealing that thing up absolutely perfectly tight. And when you heat it, the hot air rises. And if the hot air can't get out anywhere, you got a really nice house. Well, now you've just created a plastic bag. So a family of 4 or 5 or 6 goes into this house, lives in it for 4 or 5 days. There's no air going in and out of this house. So it's actually a health hazard not to have air coming in and out of this house. Furthermore, some of these houses have large kitchens and couple dryers, lots of bathroom fans. If you turn on a couple of them, you've already maxed out what that house can handle. So now if you go turn your dryer on, your dryer's not going to run, or it's going to run backwards because the range can actually outpower the dryer. So the dryer's actually flowing into the house instead of out of the house. So there's a lot of issues with sealing these houses up as tight as we are that a lot of people don't understand the mechanicals of the house and how it runs.
I just see, it just seems to me that we're putting something into place to make sure that we have houses, so we have houses that are super sealed, and then we're spending more money, so we spend $200 to make sure the house is super sealed, and then we spend an extra $1,000 to have the air exchanger so that we can bring air in because the house is sealed too tight. It seems like we're not going in the right direction there for whatever reason. We should have a little looser houses or something. I'm not sure. And that all depends upon the wind, right? I mean, if you have no wind versus some wind, some wind or 20-mile-an-hour winds, which is so common here in North Dakota or where we live. And I don't know how we get to the point, where training, because it sounds like it's a training issue as far as how do you build a good tight house. I don't necessarily, $200 isn't a huge amount of money, but it's money, and again, over 100, over 1,000, I don't know how many houses we build a year. And in today's economic climate, that's the least of the, things that have increased in price or increased the price of a house. It just seems so silly to me to spend $200 to make sure these houses are super well sealed, and then we're at the same time putting in an air exchanger to make sure that we're bringing in outside air continuously. throughout the year, and paying for the energy that's associated with that. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other concerning energy use, right? The idea with the blower test is so that the house doesn't leak air. Because when we leak air, we have to heat that air or cool that air in the summertime, and that's an energy issue. So that's where this is the IECC, right? This is what it's about, energy conservation. So it seems to me we're kind of forcing ourselves to do one thing that costs even more money. So it's not the 200, it's the 200 plus then the whatever the heat exchanger costs, the heat exchanger installation or the air exchanger. And I don't know where I'm going. I'm started talking circles, so I'm going to shut up. But it just
Let me make a comment on that. In Minneapolis, St. Paul, there was a regional study done in Minneapolis, Chicago, and Michigan. And they found that houses below a 50 HERS rating sold for a 10% premium. So a $500,000 house sold for $50,000 more. And they found over 40,000 HERS rated homes. The public is looking for certified houses with data. If you don't do a blower door test, you have no data. And the other element is that, and I put on classes for appraisers and lenders and realtors and builders in the Twin Cities for Xcel Energy. And these banks, more than 50% of these loans are being sold off to the secondary market. If there is no third-party data, if there was no blower door test, it's about half of a HERS rating report. If there's no third-party data, the builder's not going to get that 10% premium. It isn't going to happen.
But Larry, isn't that really up to free market capitalism? Isn't that a sales thing where if you can say, hey man, our house is this much, this energy efficient, you buy a standard house, it's going to cost you this much to heat and cool. You buy our house, it's going to cost you this much to heat and cool, because ultimately it's about the price of energy, the amount of energy used, right? And so from a free market capitalist kind of society, it's like if you've got an approved product, a better product, then isn't it up to those people to market that product, to test
I agree
that
with you
product?
on the free market, but you have to start the market somewhere. If there is no blower door standard, you're not going to see this third-party data. You're not going to see the third-party inspectors generating that third-party data that the lender's going to need.
Right, but at that point, if everybody is the same because of the code, and I get the code, and I'm not going to argue that, but if everybody has to pass the blower door test, then how's anybody? What I'm saying is if you can say you've got a better product, a more energy efficient product, that really should be up to the builder, because it maybe costs more to build that house or to build that multifamily building, and there's a reason for it, is to save energy, which is dollars. So I understand what you're saying, but it just seems to me that if everybody does a blower door and everybody passes, then where's your premium?
Well,
You're gonna have
like
to
I
find
said,
other things.
To spend $300 or $600 for a HERS report and on a $500,000 house and get a $50,000 premium, it seems to me that's a pretty good investment for the builder. And I agree with you on the free market side of it. But what we've seen in North Dakota is there's not been any central government emphasis to encourage testing. And so there's been a disconnect between what the builders are doing and what the realtors are doing and what the lenders and appraisers are doing, because they don't have any third-party data. And the blower door test, I think, may not be needed in the long run and let free capitalism go, but in the short run, it's an educational tool, because there's a number of builders that build in Fargo that don't build in Moorhead, and they're at a different level for quality than those who build on both sides of the river. And the blower door test, I think, is an important tool. The other thing is we're sitting with this COVID right now. You talk about making a house tight and then putting in an air-to-air exchanger. That's defeating the purpose. Well, this building here does not depend upon leaks in the walls to support itself. It's required by commercial code. I've worked in the commercial market for 20 years. doing performance contracting. And, and so if you're gonna bring in fresh air into this building to help with the health of the employees, why wouldn't you do the same thing in your house when you're spending twice as much time in your house than you are at work? You know, the main reason why people are getting sick when they're working at home is because there's no fresh air coming in to dilute that. And ASHRAE came out with their 60.2.2 standard for fresh air and their comfort standard 55, talking about increasing the fresh air component per occupant to 30 CFM. Well, you can't do that if you don't have a fresh air ventilator to bring in that into there. So we're only shooting ourselves in the foot. The average family, according to the Kaiser Foundation, spends $21,000 a year, and a lot of that's by the employer, for healthcare costs. The average family spends less than $2,000 a year to heat their house. Where are our priorities here? We need healthy buildings.
Okay. John, you have some input?
John Gunkelman, Dakota Construction. Melissa, I think I just got to clarify one thing with you. Our air exchange rate for Fargo is going to be at 5,
Yes.
not even 3. It'll be at 5 air exchanges, and that's pretty easy to meet. But I think, not to jump ahead, but had some meetings with Melissa, and part of what we're talking about will be handled in another area too, with when the mechanical contractors are required to do a manual J and D
Yes.
on the sizing of their equipment, and that will also trigger whether an air exchanger, I think, is needed.
Correct. Yes.
So we are correcting some of these things, and I think part of the thing with the blower door test, just if we look at economics, Clay, was we're not jumping to the same standards of insulation as Minnesota. We're still down at R49 instead of R60. Minnesota is very close to going to a continuous insulation value on the outside, which they haven't done yet, but we're still at an R21 in our wall construction. So I think, and I'm also on the committee at Home Builders, and we were just kind of, sometimes we weigh some of the things that what are going to cost money. And so the blower door test, I felt, was in one way, was a trade-off in not going to those higher insulation values, which would actually cost more money than the blower door test. Plus, if I remember right, the blower door test can be done at any stage of construction.
It says in the book that it can be done at any time after the creation of all penetrations and anytime after creation of all penetrations of the building thermal envelope have been sealed. So it doesn't
So
specify
that,
when.
well, I guess if you read into that, that would almost mean that the can lights should be in. So we really, and I suppose we're going to say that if somebody was to ask, you'd probably say after the house is sheetrocked. That you would,
But
that,
not taped?
well, the taping doesn't,
I think the only reason you do it before it's taped is if you have to take
in
some
case
sheetrock
you
off
had
to fix
absolutely,
it. It's a
but keep
whole
in
lot
mind,
easier.
to meet 5 air exchanges, I hate to say this, but I think we could go to a 40-year-old trailer house and maybe meet 5 air exchanges. I've worked with Larry for many, many years. We did, years ago, we did a very energy efficient house for my daughter and her husband. And we got down to 4.4 air exchanges. And then we also realized when we got done, we had a window partially open upstairs. So, I mean, you can get them down to almost no air exchanges. But then you put in the other equipment to offset it. But you do spend the money to do this. So it's a trade-off between affordable housing and where we're at. And I think that's a big part of it.
One other thing that's going through my mind, because I tend to think of houses, single-family dwellings. How does this relate to apartments? And does it, or is that in?
This, it does
is that
not.
in the other? does
That's
not?
in the commercial
Okay, so
side.
But twin homes and things like that?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think our our zone 6, changing of that also does the R49 and that type of thing where we wouldn't be, although I don't know if Minnesota will change theirs to go to the new zoning for Moorhead and the other communities that are up here, or not, but
Your duplexes wouldn't pass the blower door test because in Fargo here, we're building duplexes in the party wall. We're not polying it. And then there's a 1-inch air gap in between it. And what's happening is the moisture in the 2 units is going into that wall, traveling up that 1-inch air gap. And then right along the roof, where in the wintertime, the moisture will condense on the outside of that sheetrock and it gets wet. And then wet and dry, we've found a lot of mold issues with that sheetrock, and we've actually seen the sheetrock get so wet that it's actually fell off there, and that's a fire hazard. With that wall between the two parties needs to be polyed in the future. And that's not having anything to do with blower door, but I'm telling you, that's one of the problems we have in this city.
And that's not a code requirement?
No, because we're seeing electrical
Because it's not an
boxes.
exterior wall.
They think it's not an exterior wall, but that wall is actually an exterior wall. And the only city that I've actually seen, Moorhead doesn't require it. The only city that I've seen do it is Detroit Lakes.
So the difference is that in a regular house, even though you have the walls only go up to the underside of the structural system versus the party wall goes all the way up to the roof.
Yep, and the party wall's not polyed. It's not
Right.
got an air barrier.
Okay.
that comment kind of refers to what I was trying to get at earlier, that the professionals in the industry that do the different parts of the industry are the experts. They do it every day. They fix the problems, they find the problems. They are a really good resource to be tapped into to build the best box that we can. So it is something that I think we should consider when we're looking at a code like this. And we really have did it some in the past with HVA, but bringing in those people and talking to them about, are there issues that you see that are not being addressed that should be? Is it something that we should be looking at when we do our inspections to say, is this, this is on the check sheet, has this been done? Because I think trying to build out warranty issues or build out deterioration in buildings means more for that consumer in the long run, because our house doesn't have problems on year 2. It doesn't have problems maybe ever.
Right.
And that's the kind of product we should be trying to have happen, as both the codes review board and inspections department and everybody in the industry should be striving for that end result.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily what someone wrote in a code book someplace, but what do we find locally in our environment and our weather and our climate that works and doesn't work, and then fix that. So that's my 2 cents on it, I guess.
So Melissa, so based on what we've heard today, which was interesting, the limit of 3, where they've, the people that happen to be in attendance that have mentioned that they've not really seen a real problem with being under 3, and being at the 5 is like, you can throw a cat through it, but you're still gonna meet the 5 air changes an hour kind of a thing. What does that change kind of your thoughts on that? Or, it's almost, to me, I'm like, well, geez, you should make them be stricter than a 5. It should be a 3 or a 4. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we would have to have a discussion as staff because, it's not just my personal
Right,
opinion on these
Okay.
things. But one
Sure.
of the things that I was thinking about as we're having this discussion is that we can do like an educational session for insulators. But how do we bring the insulators to the table? Who's going to present it? Who's setting the content? Who's talking to the guys who are actually out in the field installing the pieces, as opposed to the ones who can take the time to go sit in class all day and talk about insulation and air sealing. And then there's turnover, so there's new staff, and how are we making sure that the information gets passed along to new people that come into the field? And that's a little bit difficult if it's, if we're sort of doing it piecemeal. It's hard to say that, yes, we can reach the more conscientious ones, but most of them are already there. It's the ones who are just doing their thing and taking their check and going home. Those are the folks that we don't know if they're doing it well enough, or where they're falling down, or where their education level needs to be raised. And so I'm not opposed at all to doing it outreach that way, but it's like we don't have a minimum, we don't have a bar right now to know exactly where we are across the board. And so it's those other folks, the folks who are not going to come to these meetings, and who are less likely to actually come to an education event, that are the ones that we really want to reach and make sure that everyone's on the same page and doing things the same way, so that we don't have to worry about that testing. But until we can set that bar and see where we're at, I don't know that staff is necessarily going to be, I don't know where the answer is going to be. I don't know. Like I said, it's going to have to be a further discussion.
Just out of curiosity, the comment was made that the can lights end up being one of the more significant places where leakage occurs.
Sure.
Because of maybe when they're put in, how they're put in, who puts them in, that type of thing. Who inspects that? Who looks at the cans that the lights go in to make sure that they are in the code that we just, we've been reviewing here today? It talks about they have to be sealed. Yeah, who looks at, the electrical inspector, the building inspector, who looks at that to make sure that those cans are actually the right cans?
That's part of the question. So the electrical inspectors look to make sure that they're the right cans, but by the time they get installed, the ceiling and the vapor barrier above it are already there. And so generally our guys don't see
So they're not going to go up in the attic.
Yeah, they're not going to go dig through the insulation and take a look at what's going on with that can light out there. If it's already been blown in. Sometimes they're there, before that. They're attached to the truss or whatever.
Your inspection happens before the ceiling insulation is put in.
But it's one of those things where it's difficult to tell by looking, if they've got it, sort of gooped up and stuck to it, or if they've got, sometimes there's a box over it, sometimes it's so variable. And so the guys do the best they can, but there's hundreds of houses going on at the same time, and they can only spend so long looking at every single piece of that puzzle to make sure that the air barrier is actually installed complete.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I guess with some of it that we've heard today, the concern that I have is that the air test won't identify all the problems that we have heard about today. So I think we're kind of hanging our hat on the air test, thinking that's going to make all houses perfect, and it's not. And so I'd like to see that addressed a little bit. If there's some things that the professionals in the industry know that we need to do to resolve some of the installation issues that we know are out there, that gets addressed in this code. And then almost all of that's going to be prescriptive and need to be inspected, rather than the air tests. Because as we've kind of heard, the air test will pass and the problems are still there. So I think we might have a little bit of work to do on that.
We have Lars from Nordic Home Inspection. He's into a lot of houses all over the area, and he can speak a little bit about what he's seeing, year 1, year 2, year 3 downstream on these houses. I'd like to have him make a few comments.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Lars Nalbach. I actually worked in construction in Norway from 1999 up until 2010. where we were building houses, remodeling houses, and worked in water damaged buildings. From 2010 up until today, I have been inspecting commercial and residential homes in the Fargo-Moorhead area. Over there, that time period, I have been through over 10,000 houses. So I feel like I could be a pretty good reference of, the things that we commonly see. The most common things that we see in homes is related to moisture, whether if it's an older house or if it's a newer house. When it comes to new construction, most houses we look at, whether they're a year old or 3 years or 5 years, the amount of moisture that builds up inside the homes due to lack of ventilation and the fact we're allowing too much moisture to get in to the basement is causing significant problems. We see condensation on windows, mold is forming on windows. We see condensation forming on exterior walls, and mold is forming there as well. And to me, the fact that we don't have ventilation as a requirement in new construction is really unfortunate. I am also a certified indoor environmentalist, so I go out and investigate problems where people call us and they want us to investigate their home because they feel like there's an environmental problem in their home. They're being sick from spending time in their home, and when they leave they feel better, and then they come back they get sick again. And most of the time what we identify is that there is a mold problem or a dampness problem or a moisture problem that is causing it. And another thing that we also see as a big problem is high radon. According to the North Dakota Department of Health, we are the company in the state that tests most homes for radon every year, and about 60 to 70% of the homes we test come back with elevated levels. And another aspect of that shows the importance of having or requiring ventilation in homes is VOC off-gassing. That's something you see in new construction a lot, and we see that people are impacted by off-gassing or exposure to VOC gases. That's off-gassing all the new building material and paint and carpet and whatever else is new in there, which also having ventilation will help with. So we have seen a dramatic increase in jobs from homeowners wanting us to come out and investigate problems in their home related to the environment. So I just wanted to come in and kind of share what we see. And I have been talking, so I think it's an educational problem, right? Because what builders are required to put in ventilation, and when they're having their interview with their customer, they will basically just ask, hey, do you want to have a heat recovery ventilator in your house? And then it's going to cost $2,500 or $3,000. But they don't really explain why you should have it. And I know this because I'm asking people these questions when I come in and do their 1-year home warranty inspection. And the builder basically, there's almost like a checkbox. Do you want it? Do you not want it? But you don't want to spend $3,000 on it because you don't know what it is. So it's important that either we make it a requirement or that the builder will start educating their customers on the importance of why you want to have ventilation. I think just that was really what I wanted to share. I don't know if you have any questions about that, but that's the most common things we see.
For you, but I'm not sure you'll be able to answer it. It's one, again, that we've had at the codes office about those ventilators, the heat recovery ventilators that they use. But it's my understanding that when there's potential for frost or for the core to freeze up, the heat exchanger core to freeze up, so there's a temperature at which they shut off. Is that true or not?
I have seen that, but rarely. I mean, we do inspections at all kinds of temperatures, and I don't see that as the biggest problem. You can sometimes see that it does freeze up. The biggest problem is the fact that when you have them, that owners don't know how to use them. They don't know how to operate them. They hardly even know what they do. There's just such a lack of education and like one of the things we see that they're completely filthy. That intake vent is completely blocked because no one is telling them what it is and what it does. So actually the most most of the homes that have these systems that we see are not working properly because of lack of maintenance. So it's just a whole educational process, and it's very hard to educate the public on stuff like this. So I think we will have to start with a code change, and I think it's important to that the builders will start educating their new owners about how to maintain it, and I think that will really improve the air quality in homes. I think it's about time that something is done, so we can build more healthy homes, both for radons, for VOCs, for moisture, mold, all that, because it's a big problem.
Thank you. What I hear, Melissa, is we need leakier homes. That's what I heard.
Well, as men usually do, we always try to create our own leaks. And so I have a feeling that that's how this is going to turn out. And the new code is requiring air exchangers in every home now. That's one of those changes that we're looking at.
So the requirement in the energy code hasn't changed. Although now that we're in zone 6 instead of 7, the requirement for the HRV has gone away. But the manual D and J, the design of that system it was required in 2018, but we were not enforcing it yet. And so now that we're going to the 21, that's going to be something that we're going to be rolling out as enforcement, that they're going to have to supply that manual D and J to design the ventilation system for the house.
I don't know what D and J means. What does that stand for? Manual D and J, or what is that?
So they are essentially, I'm not a mechanical person.
Okay.
So in chapter 3 of the building code, there's the table that gives you all of like the climate data and all of the, the wind speed and all of the
Right.
design criteria, table 301.2. And it includes a whole bunch of things that came in the 2018 that give you all of the numbers for like relative humidity and cooling days and heating days and all that kind of stuff. For designing your system, manual D and J essentially give you guidelines on how to use that information to figure out what size your equipment needs to be. And so it's typically, we've seen the same equipment installed in houses in town for decades. But the houses get tighter and tighter and tighter, and we're still installing the same furnaces and air conditioners. And the equipment's now so big that it's causing some of these problems where it's exhausting so much air and it can't get any back. And so that balance needs to happen. So I can't say whether or not the air exchangers are going to be required. I suspect probably, because it's still, you still have to exhaust that air. But one of the pieces of the whole energy code puzzle is making sure that you're installing equipment that's the right size and the right power for that space that you have. And then making sure that the air that it's pushing out of the house is balanced by fresh air that's coming into the house. So you have, instead of having whatever air happens to meander into the house through the cracks in the walls, that you have some control over that, so that you don't have that air coming in through your insulation. You don't have it coming in through that wall where it's going to deposit moisture and dirt. You have it coming in through the ductwork at the ventilator.
Sure. Yeah. Just again, based on what he was saying, these heat exchangers, there's a cube in them. Air from inside the house goes through the cube this way. The fresh air goes through that way. It exchanges the energy, and you have a 50% or 60% air recovery, depending upon if you're probably in heating. Cooling wouldn't be the same necessarily, but again, based on that, if you don't replace the filters, if you don't have filters before that heat exchanger cube, which is a very thinly, just very thin sections that allow that heat exchange to happen, that just gets dirty and plugged up and doesn't work. And then my understanding of it is water freezes at 32 degrees, no matter where you are in the world. it freezes at 32 degrees. So if you're bringing in outside air that's 20 degrees or 10 degrees or 0 degrees, and you have any moisture in the air that you're exhausting, which is one of the problems that we're talking about, is too much moisture buildup in a house. My understanding of it is those units, they shut off because it'll become a chunk of ice in your heat exchanger and nothing's gonna go on. Again, with that, my question with that is, if you install it, but it doesn't work when it's cold outside, what good is it necessarily? As far as in the dead of winter, when we tend to have our doors closed and windows closed and, you know, the house really tight. So I'm just not sure if there's, if they work the way that they're sold.
And I can't answer that. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a mechanical person. I'm not familiar with the equipment. The requirement that's in the code is not new. It's been there.
Right.
So it's not that we're adding any new requirement for ventilation. We're adding the requirement for the design of that ventilation. So it's just that we haven't enforced that piece of the puzzle, and that's in part, at least where we think that some of the moisture problems are occurring, is that we're not having that air exchange that needs to happen. And so wherever the leaks are, that's where the air is coming in, that's where the moisture is coming in. So,
I can address that mechanical side. We're seeing around town, the air conditioning systems at least 50 to 100% oversized. And so they're short cycling. They never run long enough to get the water come off the evaporative coil. I've gone around to all the supply houses offering to give free training to the mechanical contractors, and they said, oh, they'll never come. You know, and I've seen as bad as 400% oversized on new construction. And I bring it up to the contractor and I said, do you have an idea what this building load is? Well, what do you mean? And I said, well, who told you what size of unit to put in? Well, the supply house. I said, no, they don't. And I go to the supply house and I mention the contractor. Don't mention the name of the house or where. Oh, we don't recommend anything. I mean, it's blind leading the blind. I mean, my job with Honeywell for 14 years was to go around and fix commercial buildings that were never designed properly from the beginning. And I've seen this problem all over, and having the manual J and manual S requirement is a huge, huge leap forward for the contractors to start learning proper sizing of systems. It's also a huge leap forward for the contractor themselves. They can start to learn the system-wide approach of how a building actually works, not only the insulation, air tightness, and building envelope, but the mechanical system. And until you get those two starting to work, you can never get to the next level of high-performance buildings. You know, so we have a huge problem throughout the whole upper Midwest. See the same thing in the Twin Cities, where I do training down there. You have to put an air conditioning system, and I would rather put an air conditioning system that was 80% of the right size and have it run 40 minutes on the hour and get the humidity out of the air, not have the mold in the walls, you know. And then regarding air-to-air exchangers, you can put in preheat coils that will come on. There are electric resistance coils that will preheat that outside air when the outside air temperature is at 0 degrees or colder, and they'll run all winter long. And people just are amazed at how fresh and comfortable their house is, and they don't have mold problems. So again, it's an education issue.
I hear that, Larry. I happen to have an issue with that, where I believe that if you have gas to heat with, which is about 95% efficient, that's a great heating source. When you use electricity, that uses coal to create the electricity to preheat your air that's coming in. I don't think of that as an efficient use of energy. Myself, personally, I don't like electricity in general as a heating source if natural gas is available. So the fact that an electric coil is used to preheat air on a continuous basis so that you don't freeze up your cube in your heat exchanger or air-to-air heat exchanger is problematic. To me, it costs the homeowner money. Electricity costs 3 to 4 times as much as natural gas. So I understand what you're saying 100%, but it just seems that we're doing a whole bunch of stuff to seal up homes, and then we're paying a whole bunch more money and energy, and perhaps if we're using electrical heating coil, your increased carbon footprint, it seems like you're going backwards from what we would do. I'd rather have a leaky home and heat it with gas. That's 3 times less expensive than electricity than I would to put in a whole bunch of extra costs to make the home supposedly perfect, but we're spending a whole lot of money to make it perfect and cost additional dollars. From a standpoint of this, I'm glad I asked the question about so are we gonna have mechanical contractors required to provide some kind of a design?
Yes.
And so who's gonna do that? Are the mechanical contractors that install this? That seems to me to be a significant leap, and I don't disagree with some of Larry's things about the equipment being oversized and stuff like that. Some of the problems with that is the equipment that's made is made the same as it was made in 1960. The heat exchangers for the heating portions of those are the same as they were when they made houses that had R3 in the walls.
Yeah.
So how is the code department gonna work on enforcement of the contractors doing that? Is it just this Energy Star thing, or is it, what is it? How is that
So
gonna be?
literally the manual D&J have essentially a design result, a form that you fill out that gives you the answers for like how big your equipment needs to be. You tell it things like how big is the house, which way is it facing, that kind of stuff. For production builders that have essentially a few different designs that they build, all they have to do is change which way the house is facing, and then use the same one essentially over and over again. But what's going to change is the size of the equipment that's being installed. So instead of installing a 75,000 BTU furnace, you might be doing a 45. And so some of that cost is being shifted from the big piece of equipment to the ventilation, to that air exchanger piece.
Right.
So we haven't done it yet, so I can't tell you. But the intent is that our mechanical inspector is going to require those forms from the mechanical contractor before he writes the permit for that equipment.
My concern would be is that I've done calculations on homes, and not many, most of it's been, large commercial. Homes can be as complicated or far more complicated. They have 4 surfaces with a lot more windows and a lot more construction techniques than you'll have in a commercial building a lot of times. And thinking of what that takes to do that right, for me is, I just question whether the mechanical contractors that do a lot of houses are gonna have that capability. So that's just a
Well, and
concern of
again,
mine is,
houses that are that complicated are not the vast majority of what's built in
okay,
town.
sure.
And so that's what we're looking at, is not just the high-end houses that have all of these complications. They're doing a really good job of most of this stuff anyway. It's the lower-end houses where you have, like I said, the same equipment that's been installed in these smaller houses, 1,200, 1,500 square feet. They don't have much complication. It's a bi-level with ductwork running down the middle of it. But they're still installing the same equipment, even though the insulation values have increased repeatedly and the air sealing has been done better and better. And so that piece of the ventilation that makes the system work has been lagging behind. And it needs to be brought forward so that it's an actual system. Because right now, we're ignoring the piece that makes the air sealing and the insulation work.
Right, yeah, what I've often seen is the cooling is the key to a furnace, the size of a furnace, because a furnace is basically your blower. You have to have a blower that does enough airflow that works. And the heating portion of the furnace is almost always way oversized because they've never changed the heat exchangers and the airflow and furnaces in
Right,
50 years.
right.
So the equipment, what I'm saying, I guess what I'm kind of getting at is I'm not sure the equipment is available from manufacturers for modern day buildings, houses.
I can't answer that, but we're not the first people to adopt these requirements.
Right.
I mean, they're all over the country. They've been, like I said, they came into the code in 2018. So anyone who went to the 18 has had the opportunity to push this forward before we get there.
Sure.
So I can't speak to that because I haven't done research on what sizes of equipment are available. They may not be stocked in town routinely, but you know, it's
And I think one thing that happens is North Dakota is known for common sense. And that's a lot of what's going to happen with any new thing like this is, you know, that has to be weighed on does it really work? And I think that's what Dave is getting to is the code is one issue and you know, I'm one of those guys that does the high-end housing, so I do a lot of what we're talking about here already. But how that gets implemented, if it is effective, if it actually produces what we think it's going to produce, is I think where our board is asking those questions
right.
hard up front, because we want assurances that we're actually going to be successful, that the money spent, the time spent, the change on how this works is productive for the citizens and the homes that they own. If we're going to make a bigger change and get into more of the air exchangers, which have some value because of how tight we're building homes.
Right.
I mean, the one is there because of how they're built. But making sure that it actually works, I think is real important, so.
The problem I have is air exchangers are a good thing to have in a house, but I would have to say that I don't know what percentage, over half, don't know how to operate it at all because the controllers that you get on them are on, off, moisture control. Every house I go into, they're different. An air exchanger should not run all the time. It should not run maybe once a day. Maybe if your house is like in the middle of wintertime and it's 40 below outside, there's absolutely no moisture out there, and your house is down to 40% humidity, you shouldn't be running that air exchanger because you're going to actually draw your house down even lower. If your house has got way too much humidity in it, you should be running it more often than not. There should be some kind of education when the homeowner buys a house on how to operate this, because it's not a tool that you can just go set it like a thermostat and it'll come on and off and do the right thing. It's a tool that you have to use personally, I would say.
Yeah, I think what you're getting to is a point of what we did with our homes is I require a smart thermostat
Yeah.
that is able to control all these systems that the code is now going to require.
Right.
And if you have all these things on separate controls and nothing is coordinating it so it works, I've had people that written that, I can't get my humidity down below X amount. Well, it's because their thermostat is set to not let it get below X amount and it shuts it off. So, I mean, making this change is going to require more than just that piece of equipment. It requires the other pieces of equipment that monitor it and make it work correctly, and a lot of education so that it's actually effective. And I know what you're getting at with the smaller homes with more kids in it need more ventilation than my 6,000 square foot home with 2 people living in it. They do. That's what Lars is finding when he gets into probably, the smaller homes are worse because there's more people in a smaller space. So there's a lot that goes into this, and I want to make sure that if we're going to make this jump, that it's done correctly and with enough information to make it effective and actually have the result that we're looking for.
And I get the insulation and those types of things. My concern is So we've got the blower door test. And then we've got the heat exchanger, which I think people have been putting heat exchangers in regardless, you know? But then you've got the engineering, you know, heat loss, cooling load calculations, if indeed that takes some time, or they have to have somebody that knows what they're doing it. I don't know if they can do that in-house, or they can do that if they have to hire somebody to do that. What I just see is there's a cascade, a domino effect of this costs more, this costs more, this costs more, this costs more. Somebody mentioned here $3,000 for one of those heat exchangers, or $2,000. I was thinking more like 1,000 or 15. Those are all, so we're not talking, with what we as the board are supposed to be doing is approving your review of the changes that the codes department wants to make. With our responsibility is towards the citizenry of the city of Fargo, and this affects the costs of their homes, future new homes significantly. And of course, there's energy savings, which is supposedly it, and yet there's energy costs on another end if you put in a preheat thing for a heat exchanger that uses electricity. I don't know how to quantify it, but it's just that I really don't want to see this. It seems like there's a domino effect of this costs more, this costs more, this costs more, this costs more, and then some people just go shut it off. You know, it's like, oh, that damn heat exchanger, man, it's just a problem. It just is, you know, whatever, I'm just gonna shut it off, and it gets plugged up. There's no filters on it. It's not installed properly. This is a real learning curve for the codes department, and how are you guys gonna be able to spend the amount of time that's required, particularly when these new things go into play, to make sure that they're actually being done? That would be a bit of a concern that I would have, because once this is on the books, we're supposed to enforce it, right? I mean, that's the idea, right? You don't want to have Joe saying, well, you didn't make Bob do that, right? So everybody needs to be consistent, and so I'm sorry I've taken up so much of the board's time on this. It might seem trivial, but if it was just $200, that would be one thing, but it just seems like as we come from apparently 2018 to 2021 here, there's gonna be some significant changes. And if education is part of that, you know, and I get it. The people that you really wanna get educated, they're not gonna show up, right? The blower door test, I guess, gives us an indication of, are you doing your job right? A question for me for the codes department then would be are you just going to ask them to meet the 5, or are you going to keep, so they come to you and say, yeah, we met the 5, or 5 air changes, or will we perhaps, what I would recommend as a codes department is say, okay, we want you to tell us what you got.
Yes.
What was your result? Was
There
it
is a
2.5
requirement in
or-
there. If you do
Right.
the test, you have to provide us the result.
Right, and then I would just suggest that in 2024, 2023, when it's reviewed, perhaps review those numbers and just see how many homes have we found where, okay, it didn't meet it. And I don't know if we would have the documentation of, so we would have something that would say they all passed, right? Because at some
Yes.
point, if they screwed it up, they're gonna have to meet it.
Yes.
They're gonna have to fix it and meet it, and then the question would be, is in that documentation, or perhaps as the inspections go, and I don't know, this would maybe require who's ever doing the pressure testing, but to say, okay, we are finding significant 5%, 10%, 20% of the homes, you know, aren't meeting, and unfortunately, I'm hearing the 5 air changes per hour is gonna be met easily. The question would be is the program working? Are houses getting sealed up better? And then do we get to a point where we don't need to, you know, do this blower tort? What I'm trying to get to is there, you know, how do we get to the point where we maybe say, we don't need to do this? Everybody's building their houses and they all meet it, and now all we're doing is spending $200 for a 15-minute test.
And I would say staff is fairly comfortable across the board saying, yes, if we're seeing that result, that everyone is doing what needs to be done to get us down below, and especially if we're seeing like significant passage rates that are down to that 3 or below, then staff would absolutely be comfortable saying, yeah, if we don't need to have that additional requirement, there's no need to carry it forward. Like I said, part of the concern is that we don't have a baseline.
Right.
So we've never established one.
Okay, thank you.
So we're like understanding you have to be at a 5 is where you're setting the limit.
Yes,
Why not 3? 3 is
because
3
we
is easy.
thought 3 would be more objectionable. We'd be happy to go to 3. We just thought 5 was.
I'd recommend a 3. I mean, because I could actually do a 5, leave the door open, and pass it at a 5. And we're actually looking for air leaks. We're looking for small air leaks. We're not looking for large air leaks. 5 is huge.
Well,
Even
one thing
when
I
I have-
would put on that is, I know some of your comments have been like Minnesota. And that has some merit in that the homes in the community, which are in both states, are built comparably. So I don't know what the Minnesota one is at now. Is that at 5 still? Or
3.
that's at
They're at
3.
3.
So you've got some merit there in that, but well, it gets tough, and when you talk about this training and what state am I in? How do I need to build this? That is something that complicates things a little bit. Usually Minnesota is overdoing it, though, in most things. So a lot of times we have not went to their level of the code just because they're dealing with
Right.
with a several million people metro area. That's what drives their code, not
Well, in
farther
theory,
North
we could
Dakota.
get there.
So
So yeah, if the board would prefer that we use 3, staff is absolutely on board with that.
how's HVA feel about that, John?
Just a couple of thoughts. Just as I sit and listen, and I work mostly in commercial work, not in residential, but it's a lot of similarities and things like that. It just seems like right now we're being asked to review one item at a time without having a good feel of overall. I mean, as I sit here today, I have a hard time approving the blower door tests. They seem like a waste of money to me, and I would agree wholeheartedly that the fresh air issues lead to moisture problems, not having enough fresh air, not dealing with moisture properly. Those are the real issues, it seems like to me. But to go through line item by line item of the code without having an understanding of what we're trying to do overall, I don't think I wouldn't feel comfortable approving or not approving this code that we've talked about today just on a line item by line item basis without looking at everything a little bit more comprehensively, if that makes sense. We need fresh air. So how are we going to get fresh air in there? We're going to need some air-to-air heat exchangers of some sort, whether they're electric or gas. I don't know if that's an issue or part of the discussion. What kind of, if it requires a certain thermostat, well, then maybe that's what we ought to specify. I don't know. And some of this will cost some money, but my experience in the commercial world, like on multifamily projects, is that the blower door test doesn't tell us anything that we really want to know in terms of moving forward and operating the building. So I'm not sure what that means, but how do we wrap up this discussion? It seems like we have to go on to a much broader discussion some other time with more people involved. You guys are great resources. I hope you would be here for the next discussion, but probably even more people involved in that discussion that are building the 1,500 square foot homes and the bigger homes and that sort of thing. I will say too, I'm wary of just adding requirements that add cost unnecessarily. I'm very wary of that. It just seems like we do that too much in building codes in general, at least in the commercial world. I see that a lot, or at least it feels like it. So where's the happy medium? I don't know if I really know. But
I guess what I'm hearing from you, and I know I'm feeling that somewhat too, is that I think we maybe need to have a committee put together and some input from the different HVAC companies in town and some of the builders and discuss this and get to a consensus of what we think will work the best for our climate. Understanding that the code has words in it and ideas in it. But I think us taking it down to Fargo, North Dakota, our climate, what's going to work the best on this code, what's money well spent. For me, if I'm going to tell someone you need to spend this money, I want to make sure it's actually going to be effective and have a reason. So I guess, I'd be more towards, can we get some work done on this and spend a little more time on this so we get it right, or closer to right. Nothing's ever
So we don't make it worse accidentally,
true,
something like that.
true. So I don't know if that's, some input that way to me, I think would help. I don't know everybody else on the board who feels on that, so.
So Sean, I don't know. I mean, you've listened to this whole, conversation, and what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I guess my thoughts on it are, we've been lagging in the energy code at the state level and, municipalities and things like that within the state for quite a few years. That's why this seems like such a large jump. It seems like such a large thing. It seems like a lot of cost and stuff like that, but a lot of these things were in some of the previous codes that we didn't adopt or we adopted and amended back. So at some point, we're going to have to make the jump. And right now, to me, it seems like we're right on the cusp of that point. Either we're going to make the jump and we're going to start getting into some of these things, doing healthier things for the homes, doing better things for our people, or we're not. We're going to stay with the old way and keep going with what we've been doing. And I know there's added costs. I know there's added, education and things like that for a lot of these things, but a lot of these things, same type of education, same type of thing has been done in other fields, and it's gone just fine. If you look at the electrical field, as far as sizing equipment and sizing things like that, electricians have to do it in the field all the time. Your basic electrician has to know how to size a service for any given home, commercial, that kind of stuff. They have to know how to size services. They have to know how to size pipe. They have to know how to size wires. They have to know how to size this and that. They have to know a lot. I don't think it's a bad thing for our HVAC people to have to know much too. I think that their education has been lacking and lagging. They've been putting the same thing in and just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. You just keep throwing the same thing in. It's the same house that we built for this builder 3 months ago. Well, we're just going to throw the same furnace in it. It's not a big deal. Doesn't matter which way it's facing. Doesn't matter what kind of insulation values or new things or different things are being done with this one. It's basically the same thing, so we're going to throw basically the same thing in there, whether it's adequate or not, whether it's right or not. I think that a lot of the things that staff are recommending that we change and stuff, because of the Minnesota changes and stuff like that have been, Dave, you even brought that to us, saying that they did a big study on it, and we took a look at it, our staff took a look at it, and they're going with a lot of it because it makes sense. It makes sense for our area. Now, if we keep going and we keep pushing off blower door tests, we keep pushing off sizing things properly, we keep pushing all these things off, we're getting it to a point where we can't do it. We're never going to be able to catch up. And to me, we're getting there. We're already seeing a lot of things where there's a lot of pushback. Well, affordable housing, it's going to cost this, it's going to cost that. Well, if we start doing these things in these areas, costs are going to come down. Yeah, it might be there for 5 years, but 15 years down the road, it's going to be commonplace, it's going to be cheaper. It's going to be easier. It's going to be normal. And supply houses might not stock the right things. Well, they will in a year. We'll have the right things in stock because everybody's using them. They're doing it right. So if we start looking at this code and keep pushing things off, it's going to become more and more of an issue. I can tell you right now, the state right now basically takes every code that we get, amends it back to 2009. First code we adopted. They basically just amend it straight back to that because they don't want to deal with it. I think that's the wrong way to do it. I think that state codes and our codes should be a little more strict, and if we adopt a little bit more stricter, we go a little bit higher each time instead of amending back every time. Because if we keep going backwards or staying in the same spot, we're not doing anything better. We're new building practices are coming in all the time. You guys see new products, you see new stuff all the time. You put them in the higher end homes, they filter down over the years to the lower end homes. We see that all the time in every trade, in every aspect of a building, except for when we look at the energy code. We look at the energy code as well, we don't need it. It's a bother. It's something we can just keep going back and back and back to, but it's not. You know, a lot of these things are things that people have done historically themselves. You know, I know my parents used to put plastic on the windows when I was younger to help keep air out and stuff like that to help. And they used to run a humidifier in the house in the winter to keep the humidity up in the house and things like that. So these are things that people are very aware of. They've been doing it for decades, just on their own. And I think it's time that the codes catch up and that we catch up and that we make sure that we're watching this when these houses are being built, that we're watching the remodels and we're helping, especially people in the lower end homes, get up to these standards that the higher end homes are already enjoying. You know, like we've heard that they were down to what, 0.4 air exchanges, and that's great, but what if we've got, you know, 1,500 square foot homes, starter homes that are getting 7 air exchanges? We don't know. We have no idea. And until we actually start implementing some of this stuff and doing some of these things, we're not gonna know. And we're just gonna sit here and do nothing. You know, it would be like building the same house that we built in the 70s. Why not just build the same house that's been selling? What's the point? You know, why get new stuff? And to me, we need to move forward. We need to do something with this. And if it warrants more discussion and we want to change some things and do some things differently, that's fine. But I think we need to do something. And we can't just sit here and say, well, we're not going to put in air exchangers because it's just added cost. We're not going to do blower doors because it's added cost. We don't know what we need. We're just looking at what we've had and we're staying there. But we need to look at something. We need to do something to move this forward. So just sitting here, to me, isn't going to work anymore. It is. I've been seeing this in other communities and stuff too. It's just, it doesn't work. We need to do something. So if we need to implement air exchanges or blower door tests for 3 years and get the data on it to see that everybody's doing great, or maybe we'll be surprised and 70% of the homes aren't passing. We don't know. We don't know. These guys do homes, but they only do homes that they're asked to do. They're not doing every home. So they might not be, if they get into a 1,500 square foot house, 1,000 square foot house, 900 square foot house, that's on the lower end, they might see something different, but I have a feeling that they haven't seen a lot of those homes. If they've seen a few, they've seen a few. But most of them they're seeing are going to be the higher end homes, the bigger homes. And that's great. But we need to protect everybody, not just the ones that can afford it. To me, a lot of this stuff has to be put in there to help protect some of these lower end homes. Yeah, there's going to be a bit of an added cost. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. People aren't going to like it, but in the end, what are we providing? We're providing a service that's going to give them a better home, a better product, and a higher standard. So to me, I think we need to move forward with it. We can warrant more discussion on it. That's great, just so everybody's comfortable with it, but we need to do something.
Any other comments?
I don't disagree that we need to do something. I just think we have to have a more comprehensive idea of what we're approving. Because there's so many of them that were being talked about that are kind of one at a time type things. And I think one of the things about mechanical systems, it's one of the few systems that are changing all the time, every minute, every day, every season. So there's a different operational issue related to mechanical systems. Electrical, you turn a light switch on or off. That's not any real big deal. And once the installation is done, you're kind of done with what you're going to do at that point. But the mechanical system always comes with operating over different conditions, and so that's one of the challenges. I don't know if we can handle that through the building codes, but at least we can get the right, requirements in there. So I'm not advocating to not do anything. I just don't feel comfortable making one change here and one change here without looking at the whole package, so to speak. And I think what you said about a committee or a group is a good start. That's probably where it should start. If nothing else, it would educate us. And I'm not sure if our board is the right vehicle for that or not. I don't know.
Well, I guess when I look at that committee idea, it probably comes from my time at the HPA and the committees I served on there. And really, I think if you get all the minds in the room that are in the industry and start discussing this with, your input, Sean, of it's time to do something. I'm, I'm fine with that. That really is, but I'd like it to be more locally looked at and talked about with our people here that do it and have real life, real day experience in it. To say, yeah, that's gonna work great. We've had problems with this. Let's do it this way, or just have those conversations. And it'd be nice to, maybe talk about, is that gonna take 60 days, or what's a, time period you guys may have to kind of think about that. We could work with the HBA and some of the other people that are here to kind of talk about when we could get that done. But I think if we're gonna take something that we've been delaying for many cycles and want to do something proactive about it, that we make sure we have it as right as we can get it. So I guess I don't know if we need to put a motion out there for that, or if it's something that you guys just want to get started, or how you want to do that.
I would say we'd probably need a motion to ask the building inspections department to look into it further, to warrant more discussion and bring back its findings. And also a motion to table the adoption of the codes, of these codes at this point.
Okay. Would anybody like to make that motion?
I'd be more than happy to serve on a committee and provide some technical and engineering background on what would work out best for the community and the builders. A lot of people, most builders don't look at long-term operating costs, but it is a real number that every homeowner's got to pay their mortgage and pay their utilities, and some education in that area would help mitigate some of these concerns about upfront cost.
Okay. John?
Just one other thought along that same line. I know we'd be speaking from a code committee and home builders. I think we'd be more than happy to work on this, and I think getting back to Kevin's comment real quickly is what we might want to do is find some builders in each, maybe 2 or 3 levels of building. I'm just gonna the Thompsons, the Jordals, and maybe get with them to run these annual D and J calculations and see if how they've been doing it is right for sizing equipment, because the main thing we were talking about today is air-to-air exchangers and the cost of a blower door, and are we going to accomplish anything? And I think I would like to think that we would find that we've been oversizing equipment, so maybe the cost of that oversized equipment running inefficiently might help. I think the air-to-air exchanger or HRV, at least the start with an air-to-air exchanger, is one of these things that from a health standpoint, we do need to make that leap one of these days. I've sat on the state building code committee now for 3 cycles. This is the my fourth one coming up. And one of the things that the gentleman that runs that committee from the state of North Dakota, Bruce Hagan, he works with the winterization or the weatherization program across the state of North Dakota, Seneca area. And one of the things he talks about is unhealthy air in houses whether it's a new house or even an old house, is a big deal. And so I think the idea of trying to put some numbers to this.
Yep.
Over, let's say, I think a goal would be maybe we should just try to get this done in at least maybe 90 days or something.
Yeah.
Sean is right. Sitting on that committee, what Fargo does, Fargo's amendments come back to the state, and they pretty well follow whatever Fargo does. So to get our amendments in the cycle, our first code meeting is in March, but we really have until probably May or June to get our amendments in. So I mean, I think it would be reasonable to say 90 days. We try to come back with at least enough data to help the board make its decision.
Yeah, I guess, I'd like to, see our goals be that we identify the facts, using, the things that are now gonna be required and see how that works out. And hopefully, going through it, we find that we can come up with a short-term payback because of energy costs and savings and things. And that's a lot easier, situation to deal with. If you want to make a change like this, you can say, here's the reasons it's good. Here's the cost. Here's the end result. Putting something like that out there on a big change like this is going to be a lot easier for everybody to manage, from the inspections department side, from the home builder side, from consumer side. If everybody knows that you're doing something that has been looked at thoroughly, well thought out, and identified why, I think that'll go a long ways. So I guess to kind of wrap it up, I'd look for a motion from somebody to kind of mention, Son, you had talked about, if you would maybe repeat what you would like to see there, and then we'll try to get a motion.
I think we'd need a motion to ask the building inspections department to look into this further and conduct and bring back some more data on it. And then also a motion to table this adoption until
Okay.
after
Get
that.
that in 2 motions, maybe?
I'll make the first motion to have building inspections look at this in more detail, as you stated.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Do we have another motion?
I'll make the motion to table.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Motion is approved. All right. With that in mind, do we want to have James do his portion, or do we want to delay that till later?
I think we'd probably have to delay that. The meeting is actually running a little long already and
Yeah,
stuff.
time's getting there, and it's probably some information you'll get out of this for
Yep.
James also.
Yeah, and we could start the next meeting with James and move into this discussion hopefully
Okay.
at some point.
Okay. Are there any staff reports to be made? With that, I want to thank everybody that came here today and did your input. Hopefully, this is the beginning of a good path to get to the right spot. With that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.